Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
I'm staring across the studio at Robert Capovilla, and that could only mean one thing. Here we go. Another episode of Military Justice Today. Thanks for being with us, everybody. And I am staring at Robert. Nice to see you, sir.
Nice to see you too, Matthew.
We were going to do a pre-show question, and then we said we're not going to do a pre-show question, but I think I want to do a pre-show question.
Okay.
So I'm gonna surprise you with one. You've got a birthday coming up next week, don't you?
I do.
What does another birthday mean to you, Robert?
Well, I think, honestly, this is the first birthday where I feel a little bit uncomfortable with my age. I'll be 38. And for some reason, 38 just feels kind of older. Obviously, it's older numerically, but it just kind of feels like I'm obviously coming real close to 40. And I've always thought that at 40 years old, that's kind of like when you're in your prime in a lot of ways. And sometimes I don't feel like I'm quite ready for my prime. Sometimes I feel more 30 than I do 38, I guess.
I think for me, it's when I was, looking back when I was 16 or 17 years old, I looked at people who were 35 or 40, and I thought, boy, those people are really old, right? I mean, and now you get to that age, and of course, I'm sure people, well, I know this for a fact. My dad, he's 80, and he's thinking, 40 or 50 is not that old, of course.
Right,
so
yeah, of course.
It's all relative to where you're at in your lifetime, but I did used to think people 35, 40 when I was younger were, they're kind of up there.
I think part of it, too, is when I go to these different entrepreneur groups or I go to these different business groups or all the legal awards that they have these days, it's all 40 and under. You're still considered kind of like the young up-and-coming guy, right? And I've always kind of taken pride that I started this firm with Mickey at a young age, that we've developed it, we've learned together. And I suppose it'll be a sad day when we no longer qualify for, the best 40 under 40 and all that kind of stuff. And I think maybe when I hit 40, I'll think perhaps that I'm no longer climbing the mountain. Maybe I'm getting to the top of the mountain, and I don't ever really want to feel that way. So 38 makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But quite frankly, to an 80-year-old person like your father, he would love to be 38 again, and I'm happy and I'm healthy and I have a beautiful wife and a wonderful business and great friends, so I guess I shouldn't complain.
Yeah, a lot to be grateful for. It's interesting you said that about the award programs, because I've actually had to catch myself a few times over the years looking at them and thinking, I'll apply for that. And then all of a sudden you think, well, I'm 5 years past it. So as you know, this month actually, I turned 50. Which is quite a milestone. And I thought that was quite a bit different for me than 40. I haven't had a panic attack with either one of them, but I certainly felt 50 was much more, I don't know, it was much more of a big deal than 40 in my mind. So,
yeah, I can understand that. 50, I've never even thought about 50. I wish I could say something productive. I have nothing productive to say.
Yeah, you know at 50 you're more than halfway there,
Likely.
Likely.
I remember a conversation with my dad when he turned 50, and he was kind of down. And I said, Dad, what's the deal? 50's a big deal. We all love you. And he said, well, same thing you just said. Statistically speaking, I'm on the back nine.
Yeah.
Well, that might be true, but with today's medicine and science, who knows? I think more and more folks
alive forever, right?
Yeah,
110, 112.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been the mindset that when I get to a point where I can't enjoy life anymore, it's time to go. So I'm not sure I would even just pick to live to 100 right now if you asked me. But you got a lot of years left, Matt. You're a young, vibrant, healthy guy. You still walk all the time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. And your wife, she's like the most healthy person I know.
I know, that's part of the problem.
And for those that don't know, Matt's wife is a professional athlete, which Matt is not, and he gets very self-conscious about that fact.
Well, professional may be a bit of a stretch, but
she is a professional athlete.
At one time considered an elite marathoner.
She has a Wikipedia page, Matt.
She does have a Wikipedia page. That is true. But I'll tell you what, you talked about 38. That is a great time, I think, to be a business person or in your professional life. Because at 38, you've got just the right amount of experience, and when I say you, I mean that collectively. But you've got just the right amount of experience. You've got confidence. Your mind is very sharp. You're not forgetting things. That is really kind of the prime, I think, of a person's professional life is those years between 35 and 45. And you're right in the thick of it, Robert.
Yeah, I read recently, I read a lot about health and I read a lot about longevity and things like that. And I read recently studies show that actually prime for a male, prime zone or prime time for your brain actually goes from about 38 to about 55.
Yeah.
That's your peak, that's your peak time when you're able to mentally function at your top game. And there's not a big drop off from 55 to 65. Now, after 65, there's some things that show that things start to slow down a little bit. But even that is starting to change now with how people are taking care of themselves. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that I take very seriously making sure that I'm doing things now to be healthy at 70, because I want to be like my great-grandfather, who was a businessman who worked until he was 98 years old.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And he used to tell me the key to a long and successful and happy life is
alcohol.
Other than alcohol, there it is. Other than alcohol, is to never stop moving. Never let your brain never let your brain stop moving. Never let your body stop moving. And he was 98 years old going down to the beach in Fort Lauderdale and swimming for 30 minutes in the ocean and coming up and trading stocks. And I always admired him, and I consider it a fundamental blessing from God that I had the opportunity to spend time with my great-grandfather, who was a self-made man and somebody who in a lot of ways shaped exactly who I wanted to become. In fact, if you come in my office and you sit at the desk, you'll see a picture of an Italian guy who looks like he could be from the mafia on my wall, and he's all dressed up, swank and everything. That's my great-grandfather. He was started in the ice business in New York City, and at 19 years old, he read about the car revolution started by Ford, and thought to himself that it would be a great investment to have the first gas station in the Bronx, New York. Yeah. And that's exactly what my great-grandfather did.
What an idea.
Yep, and served in World War II, and then sold his oil. I guess it would be a gas company. He wasn't in the oil business. He was in the refining of gas and gas stations. He sold that to Hess somewhere, I believe, in the 50s or 60s. Yeah. I haven't pinned that down exactly. And they gave him quite the parachute. And after that, he got into the steel business until the day he died. And
we
awesome.
could all be so lucky to live to be, you said 98?
98.
98. 98. To live to 98 and still be healthy enough to swim and all that other stuff.
Oh, yeah. He was a remarkable guy, remarkable man.
Well, it's a good story because we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk about taking care of yourself and being healthy. We're going to do that in the context of a preparation for a trial, but that's obviously an incredibly stressful time for attorneys. I don't think most people can quite grasp the idea of prepping for a trial and the toll that it takes on you, let alone the trial itself. But you had thought this would be a good topic for our listeners. I totally agree. I think it's going to be a great show, and I'm looking forward to doing it with you.
No, I'm excited about this show. I wanted to talk about how to take care of yourself mentally and physically in those weeks leading up to trial. And then we'll talk a little bit, too, about how to handle the trial itself, because I'll be honest with you, this was something that I did a very, very poor job of earlier in my career. When I got out of active duty and I started trying cases all over the country on a monthly basis, I did not handle or prioritize my health the way that I should have, and I put on 30 pounds in a year. I felt bad. I lost some confidence because of that, and honestly, my brain was not as sharp as it was when I was running and lifting, and I took great pride when I was active duty in being physically fit. I loved to lift heavy weights. I turned into a pretty darn good runner. I remember I had 4 PT tests in a row at 299. I missed the 300 each time by, I think, 3 or 4 seconds on the 2-mile run. But it was, being in shape was something I took great pride in. And I didn't recognize how physical activity, being healthy, being strong, having muscle mass, having cardiovascular endurance, I didn't realize how helpful that was to me as an attorney until I lost some of that and had to fight, and am fighting very hard to get back to it.
Do you think it's the stress that gets somebody away from that? I mean, I guess there could be a number of reasons why somebody moves away from it. One, maybe they never had it, never growing up. You know, they weren't an athlete. Nobody ever showed them how to take care of their body. Some of that is financial. You know, you can't eat at Whole Foods if you don't have the money growing up. So some of it's that way. But for somebody who does know how to train and does know how to be healthy and does know kind of what those endorphins do to their performance and their overall well-being, how do you get away from that? Do you think it's just the stress of it and you get wrapped up in the work and so you move away from those processes that you might otherwise follow even though you know they're good for you?
So trial and the preparation for trial, at least in my life, and I know that I'm not the only one this speaks to that's listening to this podcast who tries cases, has a tendency, because of the stress and just the massive amount of workload, to pull you out of your routine. And Mickey likes to make fun of me a lot about my routines. I am a very, very routine-driven guy. I get up pretty much at the same time every morning. I do the same things almost every single morning. And when at least earlier on, when I was prepping for trial, I would start getting away from those routines that were so effective for me.
Yeah.
And that would lead to a little bit of a breakdown of my intent throughout the day. And what I mean by that is I spend a lot of time every day making sure, and I do this in the morning, that I'm living intentionally, that I'm intentional with my family, that I'm intentional with my faith, that I'm intentional with how I want to build our practice, that I'm intentional with my cases, and I'm intentional as a leader, as a guy who runs a law firm now. And what trial does is it kind of breaks down those routines, because the stress can get to you, the time at work can get to you, working extra hours, you sleep in, you miss a meal, you make up for it by going to Waffle House and eating 1,000 calories of butter. You know, you work late, so you eat late, and that leads, at least for me, to some ice cream at hours you shouldn't be eating ice cream. And before I knew it, I had put on 30 pounds in the blink of an eye. It wasn't even a conscious decision. And I skyrocketed up to about 220, and I'm not a very tall guy. And then, I recognized really quick I needed to make a change, and I'm down to about 208 right now, which is it's a good number. I want to be at 180 by January 24, and I can just tell you that the major change that I made was sticking to my routines no matter what. And two fundamental steps that kind of helped me manage this growing practice, the cases, my employees, all these different things was, I'm a big reader, as you know. I finish about 3 to 4 books a month. Some of those I sit down and read. Some of those are audible. But I love to read. I read about health. I read about, finance. I read about how to run a business. I read about religion. I read a lot. And I came across 2 books. The first was called The One Thing by Gary Keller, and the second was called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And they are both recommended to me by another entrepreneur. And those were 2 books that, taken together, really kind of changed my life and how I approached my daily work, so that I could have time to make sure I was taking care of myself physically and mentally.
Yeah, because it's one of those things where if you don't make a point to do it, it doesn't get done by itself. And maybe that's like most things, but I could probably think of a dozen things just off the top of my head that will get done even without a great plan. But something like your fitness and your preparation, and especially during times of stress, if you don't have a game plan in place, a solid one, I think you're really behind the ball and probably have very little chance of success.
And when it comes specifically to trial work, I recommend to any trial lawyer out there, read the book, The One Thing. It has nothing to do with the law. It's got nothing to do with the rules of evidence. It's not written by Jerry Spence. It's written by an entrepreneur who is in the real estate business, Gary Keller. I believe it's Keller Real Estate. It's $1 billion company, I believe. Nothing to do with the law, but it does talk about how to get things done. And when you're a trial lawyer in trial preparation, you have to get things done. And the premise of the book is throw away the clutter. Don't try to multitask. In this crazy world of ours, we are multitasking all day long. There's times in this podcast where I'm multitasking, where I'll look at my phone.
Yeah, because your phone's buzzing
Right.
or beeping. And
the premise of that book is find the one thing for that piece of work that you have to get done, the one most important thing. Shut off the social media and focus on it. And if you can do that and you accomplish that one thing, you're going to be successful in a lot of the other little things. So for me, I took that advice and I thought, how do I apply that to being a trial lawyer? Well, Mickey and I sat down. We talked about this philosophy a little bit. We talked about how does this work for casework. And what we came up with is the most important thing in any trial, especially with what we do, which is predominantly, almost exclusively military defense, Title IX work, sexual harassment defense, sexual assault defense, is the cross-examination of the alleged victim. If you get that part right, your opening, your cross of other witnesses, your close will almost write itself in a lot of ways. Now, that part is hard because you have to be familiar, we've talked about this, with all aspects of the case. So I started to, I have a process, investigation, reading witness statements, and then I really started to focus on that one thing early in the process. And I started writing and drafting those crosses 2-3 months out from trial. And that one thing changed a lot for me in terms of trial preparation. Because when you get that one thing done, the anxiety kind of goes away.
Yeah.
The pressure kind of goes away, and it allows you to focus on the other things. So, that's one thing that I've identified, no pun intended, that's been helpful to me.
I think identify is a great word, and I think the idea of picking something that has to go well. What one thing, if nothing else goes well during this process, God forbid, if one thing has to go well, what is it? And then focus on that and then take action on it, right? Because you're right. You knock that out, or you knock a little bit of it out prior to 2 weeks before trial or 3 weeks. You do some of that early, and it automatically removes that stress that comes with that one thing that you have to do, and it has to go right.
Right. And so I started applying this principle to my trial work. And obviously there's more than just one thing when it comes to trial, but the idea is focusing exclusively on the most important thing and then moving on. And then I started to apply it to other areas of my life. So
before you say that, I hate to make a joke at this point in the show because I think it's a serious topic, but when you said, what's the one thing I have to do or I has to go right, I immediately thought of 4 pieces of pizza. Like, I'm not kidding you. I immediately, I'm not joking, my mind went to the one thing I have to do today is eat 4 pieces of pizza. That's probably not the way it's designed to work, right?
Well, hey, enjoyment, self-enjoyment is one of those things. I think Judge Smith, who was we just had on as a guest, would agree with you. Pizza is a darn important part of being alive. Lord knows if I could eat pizza every day, I would.
But that's not the way your mind should work. And maybe that's what happens when you turn 50 instead. Instead of thinking of that cross-examination, you're thinking of eating. But anyway, we'll probably edit that section out. Let's get back into the...
I'm saying it right now. I'm looking at our producer. That is not to be edited out. The people need to hear about how Matt
dysfunctional his diet is.
The man who runs the marketing at my firm, the one thing he's thinking about is 4 pieces of pizza. But no, on a serious note, Matt, I took this principle and I applied it to all the major areas of my life. So I divide my goals up by my priorities. So priority number 1 is my faith. My belief in Jesus Christ, my belief in the Heavenly Father. So what's the one thing I have to do every day to make sure that my soul is taken care of, to make sure that I'm at peace with myself? And that's prayer.
And you do that in the morning,
every
right?
single morning.
Yeah.
Usually I set aside 15 minutes where I turn everything off but the timer, and I just focus on my prayer life. And then you ask yourself, okay, after my prayer life and my faith, what is my next priority? What's the next most important thing in my life? And that's my family, right? So I say, what's the one thing that I can do today for my wife and for my family that will show them how much I care? And sometimes that one thing is as simple as walk up to my wife and give her a kiss and tell her how much I appreciate her. Sometimes it's something as simple as making sure she knows how much I appreciate the fact that she spent Sunday cooking my meals for the week, right? And then, after that, it's my health and my fitness. That comes before my business, because if I'm not healthy and if I'm not strong, I'm not running my business the way that I need to. I'm not being there for my team the way that I need to. So usually that's a little bit more in depth, right? The one thing is before the clock hits 7 a.m., I have a 45-minute strength training or 45-minute cardio session, and that's broken down to some stretches and things I do as well.
So now what you've done at this point is you've created kind of silos or pillars of your life that are important to you, that mean something to you. And then you make sure that you do one thing each day in each of those areas, and preferably at the beginning of the day, because then it's done, right?
Exactly right. In my line of work with how the business has grown, if I don't get these things done by 7:30 in the morning, they're not going to get done. Back when it was just Mickey and I at my dining room table, sleeping until 7:30, working out for a couple hours, walking the dog, starting work around 11:30, that was fine. But now, we run a multi-million-dollar business now with employees who depend on us every day, with clients who depend on us to be our best. And I have to be more intentional. And I felt at times running this business as it grew that, the Coca-Cola bottle was just overflowing, out of the cup. And I had to find the best practices. So what I did was, I have nobody in my life really besides you, Matt, that helped me manage, this growth and what we're going through. I don't really have a business mentor. Nobody in my family has really tried to do what I'm trying to do. So I turn to some of these people that do a great job of writing these books, like Gary Keller, who runs an organization, with a couple thousand employees.
All right, so let me ask you a question before we jump back into the books. But let me ask you a question. Do you find that once you get in a routine of these things that you're doing, the one thing that you want to take care of for your family or for your health, do you find that you crave those and have to do them each day? I mean, is it one of those things where, a lot of folks get into a workout routine and they need it? Like it's a pain in the butt to do it at the beginning, and then it kind of gets to, I'm going to do it, and then it eventually gets to, I have to do this. This is the thing I'm looking forward to most to do today.
It's important to note that I fail as much as the next person. I still have days where I don't live up to my own expectations. And that's okay. We're human beings. We owe ourselves grace. That's why we're not perfect. But what I will say is absolutely, I've gotten to a point now where if I don't do these things, I feel off all day. I feel like something isn't quite right, especially with the prayer life and the physical fitness. If I don't get those things in early, my brain doesn't function the way that it needs to. I had a mentor, actually my uncle, who's coming to visit me soon, and he wants to see our office, which I'm excited about. My uncle's been a very successful chiropractor. He's built a really nice business. And he one time told me, Rob, a man, and I'll say, or a woman, right, needs a few things in life to be satisfied and to be happy and to be productive. And that's number one, God. Number two, a great love. And number three, a fight. And I've always thought about that, about how I design my days, and this kind of focusing on one thing goes to that. I want every day of my life to be full of love, God, and a fight.
Yeah.
Those are things
something
that kind of get
about.
Yeah, those are things that get my blood going.
All right. Well, what are the other things with an eye toward trial, a looming trial? What are the other things that you can think of that are important for you in preparation, doing a good job for your client, but also keeping your sanity and your stress level to a minimum?
Sleep. When I was a younger trial counsel, a younger trial attorney, I would sacrifice sleep to get what I had to do done. It is better to not practice that closing statement one last time and get a solid 8 hours than it is to practice that closing statement and get only 6 hours.
Yeah.
Hydration. You've got to hydrate. Trial is such an unhealthy environment, okay? These places, especially in the military, a lot of them, the air conditioning never works right. There's usually no windows. You're stuck inside, like almost like a caged animal. I have oftentimes said, I wish that they designed these courtrooms a little bit better. But you have to hydrate, because if you're not hydrated, the brain is not going to work the way it should. I mean, our bodies are 80% water. There's water in our blood, in our brains, in our hearts, in our muscles. You got to make sure you're hydrated. And then the last thing, that I would say is, for me, it comes from my faith, right? But if you're not somebody who believes, that's fine. But you've got to find a way to take some of the pressure off yourself. Because let me tell you something, you're not perfect, and you're going to do something stupid at trial. Just accept it. It's going to happen.
Right.
You're going to say something stupid. You're going to trip on something. You're going to do something you regret. You're going to ask one question too many. And to me, I'm a perfectionist in a lot of ways. I'm a little OCD in certain ways. And to me, learning how to forgive myself and say, listen, this is in God's hands anyway, has allowed me to still do great work, but be a little bit easier on myself.
All right, well, let's circle back to a few of those, because I think it's fascinating, the three things that you just listed. But let's go back to the first one, sleep. How do you turn your mind off at the end of the day? Because after a trial, right, all you're thinking about, well, first of all, you've got to be on your game every moment of that trial while you're in the courtroom. And then even outside of the doors of the courtroom, you're talking with your client, you're talking with your client's family. There's so much information that you're being forced to process. And then you get back to your hotel room or wherever, and you try to decompress. The challenge I think most people have in a situation like that is, how do I turn my mind off? I'm thinking about the things that I could have done today. I'm thinking about the things I'm going to be faced with tomorrow. How do you wind down, get your mind to kind of shut off so you can get sleep? Because sometimes it's hard, right?
You have to have a routine. Just like I talk about a routine in the morning, I have a routine at night. And when I travel for a trial, I drive my wife a little crazy at home, because I want to make sure I have every single thing I need to make that hotel room as much like home as I can. So it starts with, you have to have a cutoff point. You have to. You cannot read your cross-examination, crawl into bed, go to sleep, wake up, and expect to be fresh. You've got to have a cutoff point. Typically for trial, if I'm out by 1700, that means by 7 p.m., 1900, no matter what's going on in my life, no matter what last-minute disclosures the government has dropped on me because they think they're going to catch us by surprise, I shut it off.
So your cutoff point is a time. It's a time certain. That's it. It's not when I finish these things, I'm done. Yours is a cutoff. At 7 p.m., at 8 p.m., I'm done.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's it, because I have an obligation to my client to be at my best. Period. And I'm not going to allow the government or the judge or anybody else to get in that way. The second thing is, I follow the same routine during trial that I do at home. I take a calm supplement. I think it's you can get it at most health stores. It's the kind of stuff that relaxes your muscles. It's like got potassium and some other things in there that will literally calm you down. That's number one. The second thing is I make tea. I make sleepy time tea every single night. I take it at the exact same time. And the third thing is I take usually 5, I think it's milligrams of melatonin. I wouldn't recommend that to everybody. That's something that I do, because it kind of
test over time, right?
It's
how
something,
it impacts you. And
correct. But for me, just that little bit of extra, I'm a high-strung person. My brain is working constantly. Just that little bit of extra relaxation, that allows me to shut it down. And then I do not have my phone or my computer anywhere where I can see it, period. I don't look at it. I don't think about it. I'm not going over Buckeye recruiting stuff or Atlanta Brave baseball stuff. There comes a point where it's all shut off, and it's only about getting myself rest.
I was shocked. We went to a baseball game on Saturday, you and I, just a 15-year-old. A friend of mine was in town with his boy playing baseball here in Atlanta, and you left your phone in the car. And I said, aren't you going to take that? And you said no. Same idea, right? If you take it, you're going to be looking at it. You're not going to be enjoying the moment or getting sleep or whatever else you need to do.
That's right.
That phone's buzzing.
That's right. That was an opportunity, kind of going back to the one thing where my one thing to accomplish during that 2-hour stretch was relaxation. and enjoyment of life and enjoying this beautiful game that I love, baseball, and thinking back to my own time playing travel ball. So
I wish the one thing would have been you would have paid our admission into the park, but I didn't see you.
I didn't even know there was an admission into the park.
There wasn't. But.
So yeah, I've gotten to a point in my life where I've recognized that resting, recuperation, you have to plan that stuff. Because if I don't, Matt, I will be overcome with just what I do for a living.
Yeah, it becomes overwhelming. The hydration is pretty interesting too, because I think most of us don't get enough water during the day. And especially if you're drinking coffee, or I drink Diet Coke, which is then dehydrating you. And if you're in trial, you're sweating. Most of the time, I think most people, they're perspiring. And so you do need to replenish with that hydration. And folks, I think, tend to forget about that, especially if you're a wine drinker, you want to relax. You know, some people's routine is I'm going to have a glass of wine and relax, and then you're further dehydrated. So,
and that's okay. I my goal is I don't leave my house before I drink 45 ounces of water a day. And I track it. I have an app, MyFitnessPal, that I track that on. And I think it says I've got to get at least 100 ounces to be, kind of optimum performance. So I try to do that every day. I think a gallon is 128 ounces. That's like the old school people walk around the gym with the gallons, right? You don't see that as much anymore, but that was kind of the benchmark. But I try to at least get 100 ounces every single day, and I do focus on that. I mean, I do prioritize that. Now, listen, I've not been doing that for the last 5 years. This is something that the last 6 months I've been focusing on as I've been trying to get myself back to a position where I can be as physically fit as I want to be, because quite frankly, I got very, very out of shape. There's no doubt. If you saw me on the circuit out there trying a case, I had a belly hanging over my belt. Finally, I looked at a photo of myself, and I thought to myself, nope, not for one more second are we going to do this. And I was a guy that used to go out and run 5 miles at like a 7:30 pace, and I went out for a 5-mile run around the new year, and I got to 3 miles, and I was sucking wind, and I just remember saying, absolutely not. Like
at a 12-minute pace.
Right. Like we've got to we've got to do whatever it takes to get ourselves back to where I want to be functionally happy. And I know we live in a sensitive environment right now and in a sensitive popular culture about weight, but I'm going to tell you, if you were as overweight as I was, which was a solid 35 to 40 pounds, you are not healthy. Everything felt sluggish. My brain felt sluggish. My body felt sluggish. I wasn't sleeping as well as I wanted to. I wasn't performing at work as well as I wanted to. And while my goal for this is not weight loss, it's physical fitness and health and longevity, I've dropped a good amount of weight, but my body fat's gone down a lot, and I feel so much better.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any doubt that you always feel better when you're healthier, and if your weight's at an ideal spot, you're always feeling healthy. All right, so we've covered some really good chunks. You know me on these podcasts. I like to kind of do things in
right.
chunks and do it in a somewhat organized manner. We talked about kind of the one thing you've got to get right. We talked about 3 things during trial. The sleep, the hydration, and some sort of peaceful serenity is kind of the way I thought. Yours might be prayer, somebody else who, that's not their thing, but maybe they meditate or maybe they just are calm and peaceful for a certain amount of time before they fall asleep. What else do you do either in preparation for trial or during the trial that helps, if anything?
So I feel good about what we've covered with preparation. I'll reiterate, block out the distractions. When it's trial time for me, really the 2 weeks leading up to it, sometimes it's more like 10 days. I map out on an activity sheet that we have at the office exactly what I have to accomplish on what day. Okay, that's key, because you do not want to prep for trial in this kind of sporadic, random moment like, oh my goodness, today the witness list is due, I got to get... No. You have to be intentional about what you want to accomplish every day, and you need to have a roadmap for how you're doing that. If you're showing up one day and be like, oh, I got to prep for trial. I got to prep for trial. I don't know. I got to prep. No, I show up and I say, okay, it is the 27th of June. I'm in trial in 13 days. Today, I have to interview these 3 witnesses. That's the one thing I got to get done, are these 3 witnesses.
For the business, the one thing for the business.
Absolutely, the one thing for the business. I've got to get this done. And when you do that for your cases, you find yourself in a position where you can reduce stress down the road. do not, folks, listen to this. I hope you take this advice. Take it from a guy who used to do this, and I'm a strong-willed guy, okay? I'm a mentally tough guy. It broke me in some ways. Do not prep trial for the last minute. You are going to let your client down. You're going to let the government down. You've got to devote yourself to a process. And if you hear this podcast, you can reach out to Capovilla Williams. You ask for me personally. I will give you the documents that I use to outline everything, because let me tell you, I want you to be successful, and you got to make sure you're intentional about what you're there to accomplish each day.
How do you put the business on hold? Because you're running a law firm, you and Mickey, and the other guys that you have in the office are helping as well. But how do you run the business during that period where you've now mapped out, I've got to do these things on these dates well in advance of when I step foot in the courtroom? How do you run the business? Do you have processes in place that pick up the slack that you can't handle at that time, or how does that work?
It is still absolutely a work in progress as the firm kind of transitions from a 2 to 3 man firm to a 7, 8, 9, 10 man practice. But here's one thing, and this comes from another book that I read called Deep Work by Cal Newport. I recommend this to any trial lawyer. And he talks about what it means to truly be productive for a selective period of time. And how to really take advantage of the time that you have. And he talks about how he has a demanding job and he's never worked past 5 o'clock because he prioritizes his wife and kids and what he needs to get that done. So what I do, Matt, is 8:30 to 1300. Everybody in my office knows. Don't knock on my door unless it's an emergency. Don't bother me. Don't come ask for help. And
I've seen that door closed before.
Yes, and I hate to be a jerk about it, but I have to protect that because my clients deserve it. That's my time to do what I need to do to make sure I'm ready for trial. The only exception that I make is if we get a good lead, because at the end of the day, I've also got to make sure my employees are, we're able to cut all the checks that we need to check,
right,
or we need to cut. So that's my philosophy, and this is key. I'm not reactionary. I don't respond to judges' emails during that time. I'm not going to respond to my co-counsel's email during that time. I'm not going to answer a call from my clients during that time. I will do all of that because it'll all still be there come 1400. But 8:30 to 1300 to 1330, that's my deep work time, and I have to have that time. If I don't, I'll fall behind and everybody's going to suffer.
Okay. Anything else that you do in terms of the business besides blocking out the time? Do you reallocate things that come in to your guys, to the people that work for you? Do you reallocate so they know, these weeks you're going to have to handle this because I'm going to be prepping a certain number of hours each day?
The only time that I'm not there to satisfy my role is when I'm in trial. And during that time, I do reallocate some things. When I'm there, as long as I'm able to devote my time to some deep thinking and to the deep work, I don't have to do that because I'm able to get it all done.
Yeah.
It's when I'm sitting in my office at 10 o'clock and I'm answering one email and I'm responding to a text and I got people coming in and I got phone calls coming in. That's when I have to reallocate because I fall behind. So as long as I honor my own commitments to myself about how I want my day to go, I'm usually pretty good about sticking to it. The only thing I'll say before we close out is post-trial, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Just
briefly, because folks need to understand a few things.
You got to talk about how you like to drive home to decompress?
Well, that's the first thing. If I get a good or bad victory or a good or bad outcome, it doesn't matter. I'm usually on the road that night because
as opposed to flying.
Right, as opposed to flying, because quite frankly, I need to, whatever happened there, good or bad, win or lose, it's got to be behind you and you got to move on to the next thing, because in this line of work, whether somebody's life was shattered because they were convicted or somebody's life was made better because they were falsely accused and you did your job well, the emotional toll that takes on me personally, I have to leave it behind me.
You need to see it physically in the rearview mirror of the pickup truck.
Yes, I'm not going to linger much. Now, what I will say is this about finishing up trial. Take some time to rest. I tell the guys in my firm when they come back from a trial, I don't want to see you for 48 hours. I don't want you at your desk. I don't want you doing anything. Now, I've got some great guys and gals at the firm that will work anyway. But folks, I know you guys have commanding officers. I know you guys have bosses. You got to take time. You got to take downtime and recover. recover. Go
Try to
for,
find some clarity outside of what happened in that courtroom.
Absolutely. If you fell off your health schedule, go out, hydrate, go for a run, get back in the gym, get in the sunshine, do the things you like to do to recover, because you're not going to be as good the next time you're in a courtroom if you're not recovered from whatever happened, during that trial.
So talking realistically now, you've got to drive. It's from some base you've been at, doing a court-martial. You've got a 10-hour drive. How many hours does it take you into that drive to really forget about the trial?
It happens faster than you would think, especially if it's a win. If it's a win, an hour in, the high kind of wears off, and you're now thinking about the next thing. If it's a loss, there's no really other way to say this other than to say that's going to stay with you anyway, and you just have to accept that, almost like the loss of a loved one. You just have to understand that was God's plan, and that you have to just accept it, and you can't internalize it or beat yourself up over it. You just have to understand that that's what the fates had in line.
But that's hard to do, right?
It's incredibly hard to do. It's part of my prayer life, right? It's part of my prayer life. I give it to God, and then He gives me the strength, and I move on.
Yeah. It's funny. You do have to eventually let things go, and I think, some of us have that personality where it's really, really difficult to do. I know in my career, I always make one or two mistakes a year on something. It's a wrong phone number, or it's a wrong person in an ad or something, and it really used to bother me. It still bothers me quite a bit, but I have learned to let it go, because I've got to grant myself 2 mistakes a year, and it tends not to be more than that, and some years it's not even that, but oftentimes I have to remind myself, okay, this is one of your mistakes this year that you're going to make, and now you've got to move on. There's nothing you can do about it, and thinking about it, you've already learned the lesson from it. You're not going to make this mistake again, but you've got to allow yourself a little bit of that, right?
Well, if you're only making 2 mistakes a year, you're doing pretty damn good.
Well, my work is pretty simple. It's hard to mess it up.
I have a philosophy: you kind of fail your way to success a little bit. Not necessarily in the courtroom, but in building a business. The problem is when you lose a trial, even if your client's guilty, and you see him put in handcuffs and the family's crying and they're looking at you, no matter how good you did, now all of a sudden they may be starting to turn on you a little bit. Let me tell you, that's a tough place to be. And it's a place that I've invited myself into by what I do for a living. And the only advice that I can give to the folks that are listening to this about that particular process is all that you can rely on is the fact you did the very best that you could. And as long as you did that, you honored the system. You interviewed the witnesses. You had a theme and theory. You practiced, and you executed to the best of your ability. You have to let the rest go. There are a few things I despise more than getting that phone call from the trial attorney criticizing what I did in a courtroom, considering they didn't try the case. They weren't there. And I try to be as gracious as I can about it, but you have to let it go. You have no choice. And it's sad and it's hard, and it's ultimately what builds character and strength and integrity, and it makes the victory the next time around that much sweeter. But if you do it long enough, Matt, unless you're Jerry Spence, you're going to have heartbreaking moments. And that's why only a very few of us end up building the kind of practices that we can be proud of, that create these legacy practices that last long after we're gone. And it's because we're the few that know how to handle that, and we can move forward with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. All right, well, how does this thing we're talking about evolve over time? You see it changing? Do you see it evolving, or do you think you found a pretty good sweet spot for these items and issues moving forward?
Well, I love to read. And I'm sure I'll come across something else from the next guru that makes me think, oh, my goodness.
I got a great book for you, by the way.
What is that?
It's a really good book. I'll give it to you after the show. I don't want to say it on air because I don't want to plug anybody, but it's a really good book.
Okay.
Might be the best one you ever read.
So it's always a work in progress, man, and I'm not perfect. Lord knows you know me on a social side, Mickey, if he listens to this, would laugh a little bit when he hears this podcast, because I have days like anybody else where I go home from work and I end up eating 2 pints of ice cream, and I'm in bed by 6:30, shoving my face with more pretzels, right? But by and large, I do pride myself on discipline, and I do think having a built-in framework for how you approach things and a system and rituals, it's going to make all the difference in your trial life, because you're going to be more refreshed. You're going to be more refined. You're going to understand what you need to be at peak performance. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And the rest, the verdict, whatever else, look, that belongs to the universe, if that's what you want to say. For me, it belongs to God, and I move on.
Yeah, and there's so much out of your control. So, you're in a profession where there's a lot of things out of your control. It's part of the reason I kind of got chased out of the profession, is I had a really hard time with that. It's hard to control the judge. It's hard to control your own client. It's hard to control the technology in the courtroom. I mean, there's a million things you have outside of your control. What I hear you talking about, using the word framework, you put a framework in place that allows you to control the things that you can, perform as well as you can on the things that you can, and then you let the other things go because you can't do anything about it. Robert Capovilla, it was great having this conversation with you. I think there's a lot to learn. People have to make it their own, right? They've got to take what you've said, if they can pick up a thing or two off of it, great. Some of it they're not going to like. That's okay. But the idea, I think, on these kind of discussions is take what you can from it. If you can implement something that helps you in your personal life or professional life, it's a win.
Absolutely.
And what were the 2 books again? So the one is The One Thing, and the other is Deep Works.
That's right.
I think it's Deep Works with an S, or Deep Work. Nonetheless, you can find it out there on Google.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, another great episode. Appreciate it very much. I'm sure the next time we meet, we will have Mickey Williams in the studio with us, but he's out doing trial work, as he has been for some time. To our listeners, thanks very much. We appreciate you tuning in. Be safe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.